So Jim Bregante is a native San Diegan, raised in Little Italy, near the vibrant life of the Waterfront, and he's a docent of the Maritime Museum of San Diego. His career, he attended San Diego City College and San Diego State University. Was it called university at the time, or was it San
It was
Diego?
San Diego State College.
San Diego State College. His career was in the building material business. Jim is active in his Italian community and has published his memoirs, which will be available if you guys want to take a look about the after this presentation. He has obviously a great love of Little Italy, and he will be telling us today about his experience there. So I hope you guys will find this interesting, and of course, we'll have Jim give his presentation, but this also will be an interactive presentation. So feel free to ask questions about it.
Thanks to Professor Clough for inviting me to share with you a historical perspective of San Diego's waterfront and of Little Italy. 100 years ago, the waterfront, the water, came right up to the railroad tracks. So that is beyond Pacific. That's beyond Pacific Highway. That's how far our bay went up inland. Pacific Highway did not exist at that time. And believe it or not, there were no restaurants in Little Italy at that time. I'm sure none of you go down there to eat, do you? Okay. We'll take a walk this afternoon down memory lane of San Diego's waterfront in the Italian community. This presentation may rekindle some fond memories of experiences in your own towns, wherever you may have come from. I'll cover my grandfather's seafaring experience on the Star of India and as a boat owner in San Diego, my experience as a child on the waterfront and growing up in Little Italy from the late 30s on to about the middle 50s. Now, nicknames were very popular when I was growing up, and at the end of the program, you're going to have an opportunity to guess my nickname, but that'll appear towards the end of the program. And at the end, I'll just briefly introduce my book to you. So this all begins with my grandfather, Agostino Gio, who was born in San Bartolomeo, Italy in 1885, a real fine gentleman. Are you picking me up okay in the back of the room? Okay. I have a copy of my grandfather's Merchant Marine logbook, and he was at 13 years old, he was a ship's boy, and he sailed in the Mediterranean as a ship's boy. Now, his final entry in the logbook was April 15th, 1903, when he departed Le Havre, France, to head to the United States, and he arrived in Ellis Island late April 1903 and jumped aboard a train right away and headed for San Francisco to be with a large Italian community out in San Francisco. Now, he arrived in San Francisco and started fishing with relatives of his for a while. Then he was hired by a company called the Alaska Packers Association, which was a salmon fishing and salmon packing company with offices located in San Francisco. The fishing boats were located in just south of San Francisco. Now, the Alaska Packers had 16 tall ships like this. And in 1901, Alaska Packers purchased another ship. It was called the Euterpe, and they started doing some repair work on it and get it ready to sail. And in 1906, they changed that name of Euterpe to the Star of India. That's a ship we have down at the Maritime Museum today. The sister ship to that is the Becalutha, which is located up in San Francisco at this time. Those are the only two remaining of the 17 star ships. Star ships had the name of Star of Italy, Star of France, Star of Germany. And in May, every year, these 17 ships would depart Alameda, California, transporting fishermen, cannery workers, and supplies, and transporting all of them up to Bristol Bay, Alaska. The fishing boats are already located in Alaska, Bristol Bay, along with the nets at that time. And again, all the fishermen, there were about 10, 12 different nationalities of fishermen going up there every year. Now the contract stated that the fishermen had to catch a minimum of 1,100 fish per day, and they were given a $5 for every $5 for every 500 every 5 pounds, 15 pounds of salmon, they would get a tip. And for every salmon under 1.25 pounds, all they received was every salmon under the 15 pounds, they would receive $1.25 for fish. But what was amazing about these fellows, in San Francisco in 1904, the average wage was about $4 a day for a worker. These guys were making pretty close to $10 to $11 a day. So I'm really proud of my grandfather, but proud of a lot of these Italian fishermen and other nationalities who came up there and worked real hard, making more than the average wage earner up in San Francisco. And then they, in turn, as they returned home each year, saving their money, they were able to start purchasing fishing boats on their own to go out and fish in San Francisco, Monterey, and places like that. In 1906, San Francisco suffered the greatest earthquake in the history of the United States. And when my grandfather came home that year in 2006, he couldn't find his sister Benedetta anywhere in San Francisco. So he started searching in the seaport villages south of San Francisco, Monterey and places like that. He finally found her in San Diego. So that's one of many reasons why I'm standing before you today. He decided to stay in San Diego, start his career, and started fishing with relatives, and then married Chiara Zalesi, my grandmother, in 1915. His daughter Angelina, who was my mother, was born, and Augustino purchased his first fishing boat that year, and his son Fortunato was born. Now, we only have one picture of my grandfather's fishing boat, And there it is in the right-hand corner here, the North America. And he put 10 gold coins down to buy this ship, to buy this boat. And the boat was only 39 feet. It went out and fished for rock cod. And this picture was taken about 1921, 1922. And right behind this building back here, the railroad tracks were running right behind there. Pacific Highway ran just about through the water here. And you'll see more of that during the day. My grandfather built his third fishing boat, the North America, in 1941. It was called a baby tuna clipper. It was 70 feet long, and it could carry 90 ton of fish. And in that day, that was relatively small type of tuna clipper. 1941, it was launched from San Pedro, California, which was another busy fishing area in Southern California. Early 1942, we're at war. And the Navy orders the North America to conduct patrols along the Mexican coast, looking for enemy shipping coming up the coast. And that went on for about 2 months. Then the Navy released the North America to send it back home and resume its tuna fishing business. But at the same time, the Navy pressed tuna boats into service. And these tuna boats were going to be shipped out to the South Pacific to take supplies to the islands in the South Pacific where our troops were fighting. And a lot of the tuna boats had guns, gun deck put on them, machine guns, depth charges. There was a lot of other type of equipment put aboard these ships. Now, in 1942, there was the Battle of Guadalcanal, and our Italian ships were ordered to deliver the Thanksgiving dinner to our Marines who were on Guadalcanal at that time, and there were over 40 Italian and Portuguese sailors who volunteered to help man these ships throughout the war. Augustino and his fellow boat owners donated a percentage of their catch during the 1940s to pay off the mortgage of Our Lady of the Rosary Church. And they in fact did. They took a percentage of their catch throughout those war years and in fact paid the mortgage off on the church. My grandfather's seafaring career ended in 1947, and we were really sorry to lose him. He was a real gentleman. He was only about 62 years old at that time, a very young fellow. But prior to his passing, he was having plans drawn for another tuna boat. This tuna boat was going to be 250-ton capacity, 3 times the size of the previous tuna boat that he owned. However, my Uncle Fortunato, when he came back from the service, he was not excited about managing a large tuna boat that size. So that kind of went by the wayside. But I know if had my grandfather lived, he'd have named that boat North America number 3. He was very, very proud of his country. And my mother And my uncle, Fortunato, told me that quite often when they were children at the dinner table, my grandfather would tell his children in Italian, but I can't speak Italian that well. I can speak a little bit. He would tell his children, "Eat well, my children. Your father is in America." So he was pretty proud of his new country. He was very successful at what he was doing as a fisherman. And I took many walks to the waterfront with my grandfather and my brother. We only lived 2 blocks away from the waterfront. And as a family, we took many walks as a family down to the waterfront. Again, we only lived on India Street. We were 2 blocks away from the Embarcadero. And our walk started down at the Grape Street Pier. There were always tuna boats tied up out here, either waiting to unload their fish or waiting to get out and have some work done on the boat. This area right in here used to be the swimming hole for all the young kids in the neighborhood. They'd be down here swimming, and in this area there were always rowboats, and sometimes there were oars in the rowboats. So these kids would take these boats and go for a joyride out in the bay, rowing the boat out there and having fun. Quite a few of them used to go behind the Coast Guard base and swim. And the Coast Guardsmen were pretty generous. They would give these kids boxes of K rations. And a box of K ration contained food in there, but also contained a little 4-inch by 4-inch box of cigarettes. So these kids were getting a little more than what they were supposed to be getting at that time. Well, you look at Lindbergh Field here during those days. This was about 1955. Lindbergh Field terminal was down on Pacific Highway. Today, when you come in and leave, you're down at the west end of the bay. And our family walk would continue south on the Embarcadero you're looking at 1940s now. There's the county operation building. These tall ships here were lumber schooners and tuna boats, all tied up on the dock here. You couldn't even walk on the dock. It was just covered with fishing nets being mended, wood. And then B Street Pier was also another site for the unloading of lumber from the lumber schooners. Our family walk continues south on Harbor Drive down to Broadway, and we would go up to India Street, and we'd head on the way home. Probably stop for a soda pop in the Tower bowling alley, which was on the corner of India and Broadway. But I have to tell you a little bit about this area right in here. This was Lane Field, home of the San Diego Padres of the Pacific Coast League. And they started their first season in 1936. The ballpark held maybe 12 to 13,000 people. And in 1936, there was a great baseball player from San Diego named Ted Williams. How many of you have heard of Ted Williams? Oh, all right, great. He was a great player. Pardon me?
Isn't that a highway? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Right. and Ted Williams signed with the Padres that first year.